Welcome back to another episode of the Bourbon Lens. This is Jake. Scott is doing daddy duty tonight, and I'm here to talk a little bit about a lot of things because this man has his hands in a little bit of everything when it comes to bourbon, whiskey, and tequila even now. We are joined by CEO, founder of Barrel Global, George Koutsakis. He's going to pronounce that better for you here in a second than I can. So, George, thanks for joining the Bourbon Lens.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to dive into some good chats tonight.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for just reaching out. But before we dive into Barrel Global, which we're here to talk about today, you know, for the listener, they may know you, they may have seen your online presence before. So just talk to us a little bit about who you are and how you got into whiskey overall.
Sure. Well, I mean, from the accent, you can probably tell I'm half Scottish, so I think I was doomed from birth to like whiskey. But I actually got into it when I moved after university. I moved to Japan, so I was there. I was managing a bar. It was I think it's quite big in the US. Brewdog. They used to have that show on Esquire. Yeah, so I used to manage the Brewdog bar in Tokyo. So I was into craft beer at that point. Had my beard, my long hair. But the importer who kind of brought Brewdog in also imported a lot of Scotch whiskey brands. So that's kind of got me into Japanese whiskey. It got me into Scotch. And then I'm just going to give you the brief version. Then I decided I want to be a writer. I moved back to Greece, where my family's from. I'm half Scottish, half Greek. And I started writing for some magazines. I started small. I started writing for distiller.com, a few different magazines. And I got up to like Forbes and Food and Wine and such. And I think then I moved back to Asia. And then I moved to Taiwan. And then I stayed in Asia for like 8 years. But I feel I was writing for a long time. I did some auctions in Hong Kong, like rare whiskey auctions. And I feel that gave me a good idea of, I guess, the global whiskey industry. I hadn't done much in bourbon by that point. It was more Scotch, Japanese, world whiskey. And I decided to start my own brand. And then I started my own, should I go into my brands?
Yeah.
Sorry. So I kind of got in touch with an ex-Formula One champion called Jenson Button. He's also in NASCAR now. He's doing a documentary on Disney Plus with Keanu Reeves. So saw these pictures recently with him and Keanu in a car, which is pretty badass. I don't think Keanu got a bottle of my whiskey, but we can hope. So I started that's like a premium Scotch blended whiskey brand with him because I kind of saw what Japan was doing with Hibiki and all the really premium blends, and I wanted to do something similar in Scotch that I thought was missing. So we started that brand, and we're trying to do like a lot of car partnerships. We're chatting to NASCAR, doing some things with some F1 artists. And at the same time, I've been trading barrels of Scotch for many years in Asia, like from the auction time, and it was something I was getting into. And I saw a big gap in the market in American whiskey for something like that. Because I know, you guys go nuts for bottles and people pay massive, prices for bottles in the secondary market and such. But the barrel thing hadn't really came there yet. And well, in Scotch, it's been there for tens of years. And now there's way too many investment companies, which we can get to in a bit. But I just saw a big gap in that market. And I decided to start Barrel Global, got a local partner there too. And that's also when I decided to make the move to like this time zone, which I'm living in Mexico now, but I'm up and down in the US quite a lot.
Yeah. You said a lot there. So let's talk a little bit about Japanese whiskey, just as an aside. I've gotten into it. You probably know Brandon Smith from the Daily Dram. And so Brandon got me into Japanese whiskey. And I just recently, to bring the Keanu tie, I just watched the Nature of Spirit of Japan that the House of Centauri did with Keanu. So he does a really good job kind of facilitating documentaries and making them, feel like they have a flow. So to bring that connection together. But Japanese whiskey, you were over there with the beer thing. Did you feel did Japanese whiskey kind of hit for you at the beginning, or was that something you had to acquire a taste for to kind of figure out if that was a thing you would be interested in?
Well, I mean, I didn't have that much. I mean, I liked Scotch, but I was still quite young, and my palate hadn't really developed as much as it is now. But I did like it right off the bat. I remember because in the bar there was always, because the guys that bring in Brewdog own a company called Number One Drink. So they did all. I don't know if you know, but they did all the Chichibu single casks that were sent to Europe. They also own the Kyoto distillery, which is that black Kinobi gin. So the guy is mega connected in Japan, the guy who brought Brewdog in. So there was always really, like, he did a bunch of the Karizawa single casks. He's actually the guy that called everybody over when the distillery was shutting down to get all the final barrels. He's the guy that brought this guy from Taiwan. He brought Sukender from the Whiskey Exchange to all select the final Karizawa barrels. So I was trying some pretty cool stuff in the bar. I think, to answer your question, I had a taste for it right away. I've kind of gone away from it now, simply because I'm not as big a fan of how the industry is going in terms of pricing and new distilleries. It's a bit of a joke for me now. Like Centauri, fair enough, legendary, Nika as well. But I feel all these small ones popping up are trying to ride on the coattails of Centauri, and they charge you like $100 something bucks for a bottle of new make. It's a bit. So I used to report on Japanese whiskey a lot. It was primarily what I wrote about, but now I'm just a bit, I don't know.
Yeah.
You can buy a good bottle of bourbon, 12-year-old bottle of scotch for half the price. It's like,
yeah. Well, and that's I'm glad you brought that up, because you see whiskey from a world landscape, and a lot of us here stateside see it from just a stateside perspective, right? And for whiskey brands to compete on a global landscape, that premium product and that premium price, Scotch and Irish whiskey to a lesser extent have owned that premium thing. Like you see 20, 30, 40-year-old scotches, thousands of euros, right? Or and you see these premium releases, and then you have this infant, really, in all honesty, which is American whiskey. How do you see that from a global landscape, seeing the history and the ultra premium Scotch and Irish whiskey that people are used to consuming to the infancy of the American whiskey landscape?
That's a good question. I mean, honestly, for me, bourbon, I think I separate each category and I see their merits and their cons. I think bourbon for me, again, I own Barrel Global. We work with a lot of distilleries, but I'm not as big an expert in bourbon as I would say I am in Scotch. So that's why we have a partner in the US. He helps run a lot of things over there. But I mean, I really like bourbon. I know it's a very different palate. I know Scotch drinkers are Scotch drinkers, bourbon drinkers are bourbon drinkers. But I think I know you've got the premium and older releases in Scotch, but then again, bourbon just matures much faster, right? Mm-hmm. And that's one of the we have in our company that we tell collectors that buy a barrel. It matures faster. It's got more flavor faster. You could say the same in Taiwan, where I live. Kavalan matures like that. It's like 3 years and it's ready. Yep. 4 years, like 10 years, it's overdone. So yeah, I just don't tend to compare them. I think bourbon's a really awesome industry. I've been loving this last year with Barrel Global, getting into it, visiting Kentucky, visiting, different states, different distilleries. I love what's happening across the whole US with the different states making it. And I think Scotch is at a point that it's not slowing down, but it is very saturated, especially in the barrel space. And I feel bourbon still has because it's in its infancy, it's got so much ways to go. It's got American single malt. It's got all these different states getting into it. They're eventually going to own, that state is going to have its own category of notes and what they use. And I think it's awesome. It's awesome to be a part of it now. And again, why I really love Scotch and I'm really into it. I'm really enjoying seeing what's happening to bourbon, because again, that infancy thing is a big pro, because there's just so much that can be done. It's exciting.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. It's so funny. People are like, when's the bourbon boom going to end? And like, we're just getting started, right? Because these companies haven't been able to really get into the giant markets, China, India, and really start to pump out volume. You think about what these distillers are betting on. They're betting on the adoption of whiskey consumption, American whiskey consumption for 4 billion people, like for, half the world's population to get in on it. And so like, what's your thought from an adoption perspective as you have that global perspective as other drinkers take on the American spirit? Do you see that they will kind of buy into the boom and it will continue to go through? Or like, what's kind of the lens you're seeing it from a world whiskey adoption perspective?
I think it will. I think you need some good importers, like some good people over in Asia to really push it. Because I was living in Asia for 8 years, and honestly, palate wise, I don't see why it wouldn't work. Like in Taiwan and that, they like sweet. things. They like, and bourbon has that kind of, slightly sweeter profile than a lot of scotches. But I think it takes time. So Scotch has been there, it's got that heritage. I think in a market like Asia, the heritage is really important. But I see it catching on. I just think they need to. I think the problem with the US is that the market's that big. The distilleries are focusing on the US. Same in Australia. Like in Australian whiskey, none of it's made it out because it's just they're all drinking their own stuff, which is great. But I do think they'll need some really heavy marketing, really smart strategies to get heavily into Asia. I know it's growing a lot in the UK, but other European markets. I do see it happening. I do think it can happen in a big way. China, India, everything. It's just, there'll need to be a considerable amount of allocation of resources and people and strategy to do that. And that's something we tell the distilleries we work with in Barrel Global. It's like, we'll help you sell your barrels over in Asia because we already have that network. But I do see it happening. And that's why when I try to pitch, bourbon barrels to some of my Scotch buyers, they're like, nah, the bourbon boom's over, Kentucky. I'm like, man, it's not. They're like, yeah, it's not moving anymore. Like it's just, yeah.
Yeah. Well, all the numbers would disagree with people on that one. And it is super interesting to watch, like what Discus puts out and the other, entities. Deutsche Bank put out something really interesting on, Campari and their growth in American spirits and why they continue to invest, and why they may look to partner because American spirits, they need more capital to go into American spirits deeper. So I think it's really interesting from a world landscape because we don't always get to see that. We focus a lot on the American spirit and in America, right? And rightfully so, because that's probably where the majority of our listeners are. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a few folks that tune in from the rest of the world. So getting into moving from the world whiskey concept to this barrel investment concept and barrel engagement. You talked about there's been a lot of companies like this in Scotland, for instance, that have done this. And you think about the big ones, right? You think about Signatory or Scott Mulch Whiskey Society, the ones that people know about, but there's probably countless others that are behind the scenes. Where in the States, like I know of two really big ones, right? Bird Dog and Brindiamo Group, right? That kind of have, or White Dog, not Bird Dog, White Dog and Brindiamo Group. So when you look at this space, like where are you kind of trying to fit in with the legendary houses that are been created in Scotland with the American, landscape where it's really kind of been owned by two folks that have really kind of made it a big deal and have got into Irish whiskey and Scotch whiskey themselves?
Yeah. I mean, to start off, I think it's worth kind of clarifying that in Scotch, for example, Signatory and Gordon MacPhail and all that, they're independent bottlers, but they're not cask investment selling companies. So they're, I'd say, I mean, not the good guys, but they're like the ones that are, bottling everything. And the cask warehouses in Scotland like that. They want people to bottle. Now, what's happened though in Scotch is there's all these investment companies popped up in Hong Kong and London. Like literally, you can throw a pebble and hit one now. And they're just in it for like blasting out as much new make to people as possible. Get out, and then later the warehouse will need to deal with the fallout. Because the thing is that the barrels are held at the warehouses under the accounts of these brokers. The ownership doesn't pass directly to the individual in Scotland because they just can't open accounts for everybody. And then these guys just blast out as much as they can, promise a bunch of returns, and then disappear. And now all the big brands, Diageo, they're all cutting back on barrel sales because they're like, if you buy any barrels from us, you need to show us that you're going to bottle it. We need to see proof of labels because there's just too many people that have came in, made a bunch of money from investment, and then disappeared. So I was seeing this happen in Scotch, and I wanted to do something in bourbon that kind of like corrected some of the mistakes that were happening in Scotch. So first thing, Barrel Global does not sell for investment. We don't mention investment. We don't mention returns. We do it for collecting. We do it for people who want to bottle, who want to own their own barrel. Yes, eventually you can try and resell it in 3-4 years. That is something we can help, but it's not an investment institution. We don't promise returns and we don't do it. So that's the first thing. And that's what distilleries like to hear, even in Scotland, because distilleries don't want to hear the word investment because it scares them, as opposed to, collecting. Eventually someone can bottle it in that sense. Now, the other difference that I've seen that doesn't happen in Scotch is all the warehouses in Scotch. Basically, the big distilleries would sell to the warehouse and the warehouses will distribute it to brokers and whoever they want. What I like in Barrel Global, what we do, and I think it's different from these big investment groups, is we only work directly with distilleries. So we create partnerships. We have like 9 distillery partners in the US now. And what we do is the kind of model is we go in, we buy, say, 100 barrels of new make from a distillery. We go there, we shoot content, we speak to the owners, we create some really cool videos. We use that in our marketing. And we take those barrels to clients we have in Japan, in Taiwan, in Hong Kong, in Europe, in the US, Canada. We just expanded. We opened Barrel Global Mexico now. And that's what we do. We create a really good partnership for a distillery that might need the cash flow, doesn't really have the systems in place to kind of, do these barrel sales, do all the logistical aspect of it and the management and the operational side of it. But wants to kind of join us and get these barrels to customers that, again, might want to bottle it right away. There's a range of clients, might want to bottle it right away for their bars, for their brand that they're building, for their hotel, whatever. And then the others that just want to own a barrel, go visit in Kentucky, draw from it and be part of that experience. So I guess to answer your question, but we want to be based on the big companies. I'd like to cement Barrel Global in there as a brand, as a place that you can go to get a barrel of one of your favorite brands, bottle it, we help create brands. So we've added branding services. We want to kind of be cemented as bourbon grows to be able to, be that kind of one-stop shop for whoever wants to own a barrel, bottle a barrel, create their own brand. Yeah.
So let's workshop that a little bit here. So the bourbon lens, right, want to get in on a barrel, and I like one of your 9 producers, and I'm like, all right, that's the barrel we want to buy 6 of them, and you're like, okay, Jake, Scott, like, great, we're ready to roll. We got your barrels. Now, if we say I want to create TTB, colas, marketing slicks, all of that, like, you all will help a person from start to distribution, or where do you all see your all's process in there?
So the way it would start is one of our members of our sales would go into you, tell you about the options, hear about what you need, what you want. If you wanted to, as you said, bottle your barrel immediately and not just buy like a new make one that you're going to sit on, at that point, we have a branding department. So then we bring in our branding girl called Jamie. She'll come in and see what you need. Do you need a label? Do you need a box design? Do you need a website? Do you want to do e-commerce sales? Do you want to, and that's how we would siphon all that out. If you just wanted bottling, that's when we connect you to Danny Strable. I don't know if you know him. He owns like Rack House Whiskey Club. He's one of my partners in Barrel Global. So he's the director of bottling operations. So he would come in and chat to you and be like, right, colas, TTB, how are we going to get it from here to there? Where do you want your bottles? How do you want them? And then he'd run all that. So we started a year ago. It's been kind of like chaotic with everybody wearing a bunch of hats, but we're at a point now where we're trying to kind of, break all that down. There's someone to manage the tours, there's someone to manage the branding, someone to do the bottling. Then again, if you just want to own your barrel and sit on it for a few years till it's mature, that's just kind of the sales team. But that's in a nutshell how it would go.
Yeah, so it's really kind of that one-stop shop, and barrels, like I know from looking into them, they're not cheap, right? So let's say a barrel of new make from wherever you want to buy it from, let's just call it $1,000. So like, what type of investment are people up for when they partner with Barrel Global? Is it truly they can buy one single barrel and start to, bottle that privately for them, their family and their friends, or do they have to have a minimum that they meet?
Yeah, so I'm very against that. I know there's other companies in the US that have like 20 barrel minimum. You can come in and buy a barrel. We don't want to alienate anybody or do anything like that. Again, the whole goal here is, my goal is for, based on what I told you about Scotch, is for the distilleries to like us, for our clients to like us, for everybody just to like each other and be happy. I don't want to be going in and charging someone 10 times what they should be paying, and then later when they try and sell it, they can't make a thing. That's just not what we want to do. We want our distillery partners to be happy with what we're doing. Because there's a lot of people that call up. We work with like Julian Grounds or Casey Jones, Neely Family Distillery, people call up and they're like, do you know Barrel Global? And they're like, yeah, they're great. Go for it. And that's what we won. So, I mean, anyone can come in, buy a barrel. We also have a service that you can, if you own a barrel, you can bottle part of it. Initially, you can bottle like 6 bottles and then you can do the rest later. So that's how some people actually go in on it together and they're like, oh, well, I'll take 60, you take 60.
Yeah.
That's why, like, for the first 8 months we're mainly just doing barrel sales. But this is now when, as I mentioned, Danny is really trying to streamline the bottling thing, because it just seems like we've got 2 kind of clients. Some of like 50% will be the ones that come in and just like, hey, I want a new make barrel. But 50% surprisingly are a lot that come in and like, I want a 5-year-old barrel right now to bottle for this, or I want 5 for, I've got a distillery, but there's no juice yet. Let's do it with them, some 5-year-old distillery. So that it's really important, this bottling operation side as well.
Yeah, I mean, bottling can be the biggest bugaboo. I mean, that's what slowed everything down during COVID. Getting the glass labels, all that stuff is not the fastest process in the world, considering when a lot of glass comes from out of the country, Mexico, Italy, and the like. And so getting it stuck on shipping containers is never an exciting time. So now that you all have kind of a grasp for what you all are doing, where do you kind of see yourself in the next 5 years? Like, what's your 5-year kind of plan for Barrel Global as you all kind of look to, mature, just like a new make barrel, right? Over time.
Well, to start for me, just because of the experience I have in Asia and here, we're launching now Barrel Global Mexico. I want to do Barrel Global Latin America, because again, there's a big lack down here as well. People want to bottle their own stuff like a barrel, but there's no access, and the import's a bit difficult. I want to expand into Asia more. Like, we're there now, but I'd like to have like a team over there pushing bourbon again. And have a really solid team over there. So I'd like to make it like proper global. We are pretty global now, but that's something I'd like to take these bourbon barrels around the world. In the US, we want to build our own warehouse. We're going to do some fun things there, but I think that's a smart next step of having our own bottling line, having our own place for our customers to visit and our partners to visit, and do some really fun activations there. I want to make like a cool warehouse. Bar division has came up, have like some like samples from all our clients who were bottling their casks, have them in our bar for people to taste and hear some fun stories. I think that'd be something I like. And then also tequila, I'd like to do quite a bit in tequila and mezcal. And just other spirits. I mean, I want to become, be able to sell a lot of different, spirits to different people in barrels. And the last one's our own bottling. So I want to do I know how Lost Lantern and the kind of independent bottling thing is growing a bit in the US, and I want to add to that. I've got some ideas, since we have the access to some really cool barrels and some cool people. I think I'd like to do our own Barrel Global bottlings for our customers as well. Buy a new make of this, you could try one of our bottles of a 4 or 5-year-old and see what your barrel's going to turn into.
No, for sure. I'm kind of glad that America has got into the non-producing distiller, but or the independent bottler market. Like, I think it's very unique. I'm actually looking at Lost Lantern samples to my right and Borrowed Page to my left, right? Borrowed Page is more of a blended experience where they, source barrels from, I think it's 4 different, folks and blended it together. And Lost Lantern's done that themselves. And so I'm glad that the independent bottler thing is coming up, and it gives the proper shine to those companies as well through that process. So I think that's very unique and very interesting as you think about the maturity curve of the overall company. You have this idea. What's it like, in bourbon, right? It does feel like a huge family here, right? Like the distilleries talk to each other. There's not a lot of hating. There's obviously competition for shelf space, but like when it's a need, like how do you feel as not really an outsider, but someone who is entering into this space? How do you feel? Do you feel like you've been welcomed with that bourbon open arms type of deal, or do you feel like you felt some resistance and strain?
Well, I mean, look, when you're coming in with a new concept to any market, there is a bit of like pushback at the beginning. So my initial calls with distilleries, they were fair enough. I don't think it was because, it was me. I think it was just, what is this concept? We don't understand it. Like, what is this? Because you request naming rights. So again, for the independent bottling thing, all our contracts with distilleries need to be able to name the distillery on the barrels when you bottle them or something like that. But yeah, I got this one good contact. It was Paul over at MB Roland, and we chatted, and and then he just introduced me to a bunch of people, and then in Kentucky, and then everybody's kind of like word of mouth, and they see that I think everybody's always cautious in business. Like maybe they're not going to pay for the barrels, maybe they're going to mess you around. But again, we like to do business like very efficiently, like pay right away. And as people have seen that, I think more and more distilleries have actually contacted me, which is nice. In the beginning, it was just a, whoa. I was like, come on. They're like, nah, we don't understand this. No.
Yeah.
Whereas I think now that some other people have jumped on board and it makes a bit more sense, and we're explaining it now, because it was also, it was a learning curve for us. Like there was a lot of legal stuff in the US system that we had to like traverse. And that's why all the investment companies are pouring into the US, because it is quite complicated. So yeah, it was a learning curve, but now it's good. Now it's great. And again, yeah, you're right. Like people are very welcoming now, especially in Kentucky. Like we've got like 4 or 5 partners there, and everybody knows everybody. And we go there and visit them, and it's great. So I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah. Because
again, in Scotch is great, but there's a lot of massive companies that own massive distilleries. Whereas I feel bourbon's a bit more, you go and you're, it's a bit more homey. Even though those distilleries might be huge and selling tons of bottles, it's still very family feeling,
Yeah.
And yeah, I've been loving it. It's been great.
No, that's awesome. And like, that's what, I've appreciated about it is they just want you to be able to tell your story, but they don't want to get in until that story can kind of be streamlined for them to help you tell it. Right. And so that's good. And MB Roland is super interesting. I had their whiskey via Hidden Barn. And they have some really cool stuff that they've done. And it's been really interesting to see how, people will use different distilleries to create unique and powerful liquid stories, because that's what they are. Like every bottle tells its own story, and every blend tells its own story. So it's super unique from that perspective. So last question I have for you. So if somebody is really ready to go, what is their next step? Like, how do they get in contact with you all and the team? Do they just go to the website? What's that look like from like they hear this podcast and they're like, I need to meet George and the team and let's go. What do they do?
Well, actually just go directly to barrelglobal.com. There'll be like a button to request access. You add, your details. And then, either Charles, Steve, he's in Nashville, or Danny will, get in touch and jump on a call and see what your needs are. They'll, I think, I should know this, but I think once you request access, you get sent a kind of portfolio. So we've got decks for all the distilleries we work with a bit of their history, a bit of their story, and I think you get that after your initial call. And then you can decide. We've got whiskey now, like from Kentucky, Iowa, speaking of like Texas, Colorado, New York. So we're trying to expand our offerings to like different states as well. But yeah, I think just on the website, request access, and someone will be in touch for a call.
That's awesome. And where can people find out more? Do you all have a social media presence? Like, what are you all doing to make sure that you all are building awareness from a groundswell perspective?
Well, we're on social media. We're on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at Barrel Global. The website has a lot of info, like of how everything works. Again, once you get, basically the way it works, you request access, you get access, then you come into the kind of members area, and that's where you can check all the decks of all the distilleries. We just kind of do that to siphon out bots and people who are just there for spying. But no, so you kind of request access, add your details, and you get into members area. And then one thing we are proud of is that we have a very like state-of-the-art system. So it's like very automated. Once you check out, like everything automatically populates, comes to you, your documentation, and then you have a members area within our portal to see all the stuff that you own, which is, we quite like.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So it's kind of like seeing all your Pokemon trading cards from back in the day.
Yeah, that tradability.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, now this is awesome. I love the concept. I think it's super unique. I think people will definitely be dipping into it, and it's a different approach, right? It's hard to teach an old dog new tricks, especially when people are so used to it being so successful the way it has been done for years. And so it's great to see you, come in and shake it up a little bit and provide that opportunity, because bourbon's about community and about creating that conversation. I think this gives an opportunity for people in their neighborhoods and their cities and their states to, feel that sense of pride, buy that barrel and have that conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, man, we're loving it. Loving every step of the journey, all these new partners, people coming in, and it's good to see when you get those good reviews on Facebook and stuff, and people are just like really happy and proud to have their own barrel.
Yeah.
It's been great.
Well,
meeting people like you, stuff like this is what it's all about.
Yeah, man. No, this is great. We truly appreciate you hopping on. We're excited. I'm excited to see this growth trajectory and staying in touch with you all as y'all move forward. As George said, go over to barrelglobal.com. Check everything out there. And if you are interested, feel free. I know he's active on social media. Go to Barrel Global. You can ask questions, I'm sure, on their pages, and they'll get back to you. If not, just go jump all the way in. Go request that information and access and go get you a barrel. So George, thanks again for joining this episode of The Bourbon Lens. As always, thanks everybody for listening to us have this conversation. If you want to get connected more with Scott and I, go over to Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Bourbon Lens. If you want to join our growing Patreon community, go over to patreon.com/Bourbon Lens. We'd love to have you there. And last but not least, go over to your favorite podcast listening app, hit subscribe, and give us a 5-star review if you got a chance. We truly appreciate it. And until next time, cheers.